Today, I want to tackle a case that has really sent shock waves across the nation and, in fact, the world. The sudden, unexpected guilty plea of Bryan Kohberger in the horrific murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Just days ago, on July 2nd of 2025, Bryan Kohberger stood in an Idaho courtroom and admitted to the brutal stabbings of Madison Mogen, Kaylee Consalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. This plea deal, make no mistake about it, this plea deal allowed him to escape the death penalty in exchange for 4 consecutive life sentences without parole, and has brought a definite end to what was shaping up to me one of the most closely watched trials in recent memory. The motive? Originally I thought it was lust, but now I've changed my mind. The motive in this case is greed. The sin greed, defined as an intense and selfish desire for something, an excessive, extreme desire, often more than one's proper share. And I believe this to be the why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Willcott. I've been a TV anchor, a former judge, a trial attorney, and I can tell you that every case that I've seen intersects with one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues, temptations that taken too far turn deadly. This week, we break down the unexpected guilty pleas of Bryan Kohberger and the deadly sin of greed that made him admit guilt without providing any details as to the how and why. A little later, I'm joined by attorney Melba Pearson in our breakdown segment, where we go deep into the how and why of one of the biggest mistrials of the 21st century. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. Honestly, the abruptness of a plea deal by Bryan Kohberger, who was scheduled to go to trial in August, has left many stunned. Imagine 4 innocent, typical college students were killed in the dark of the night in their own home on November 13th of 2022, a little more than 2 years ago. For months, everyone has followed every twist and turn, the complex legal maneuvering, the sealed documents, the anticipation of a grueling trial that was going to request the death penalty for Bryan Kohberger. And now, at least in terms of a verdict, Kohberger has pled guilty. He was a criminology PhD student at the time of the murders, and he just responded with a simple yes when Judge Stephen Hippler asked him if he was pleading guilty because he was guilty. The response? Yes. Would there have been enough evidence to convict Kohberger if the case went to trial? And would there have been enough evidence that he could have received the death penalty? In my opinion, from the bench, yes. Here's the evidence against Bryan Kohberger as outlined by the prosecutors had he gone to trial. Number 1, the DNA evidence. A knife sheath found next to one of the victims in the home where they were killed contained DNA from a single male, and that DNA was later matched to Bryan Kohberger through a Q-tip collected from his parents' trash. Number 2, cell phone data. Kohberger's cell phone connected to cell towers in the area of the crime scene. Get this, 23 times between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. in the months leading up to the murders. Premeditation, scoping it out. His phone also pinged back in the area of the crime scene hours after the murder. The prosecution also had outlined previously vehicle surveillance videos. This was from neighbors and businesses, and what it accomplished was placing Bryan Kohberger's Hyundai Elantra in the area of the crime scene on the night of the killings. And get this, the car was seen speeding away from the neighborhood just after the murders occurred. An eyewitness account. There were survivors in that home, 2 surviving roommates. One of those surviving roommates saw an intruder with quote unquote bushy eyebrows wearing black clothing and a ski mask leaving the house around the time of the murders. Purchase history. Online shopping records showed that Kohberger had purchased a K-bar knife and sheath similar to the one found at the crime scene, and that he had purchased those just months before the killings. An attempted cover-up. The prosecutors say that Kohberger took back roads after he fled the murder scene to avoid surveillance, and that he specifically didn't turn his cell phone back on until later. He then also was discovered to have changed his car registration, meticulously cleaned his apartment and his car, and he also apparently searched for K-bar knife and sheath information after the murders, and then he attempted to delete his Amazon purchase history because, remember, months before the murder, he had purchased a similar knife and sheath. Now, this is the most chilling piece. Evidence from his cell phone shows that he took a selfie hours after the killings, where he's smiling and giving a thumbs up after brutally killing, he's admitted his guilt, brutally killing 4 University of Idaho students found in their home, stabbed to death. A smiling selfie taken just hours after killing 4 students to whom he has no known connection. Number one, no doubt in my mind he would do it again if he was not locked up, but also no doubt in my mind, based on the evidence, that he would be convicted and likely be sentenced to death. I am so honored to have joining me now Melba Pearson, criminal justice and civil rights leader, legal analyst, prosecution expert. Melba, so great to have you on. And I'm just going to start with this. Bryan Kohberger, we were looking to his trial. We are expecting his trial. Prosecution announced they were seeking the death penalty if convicted of the murders of these 4 University of Idaho students. And the shocker is, number one, he entered a plea. But the bigger shocker is when family comes out and says, we are heartbroken. We did not know. We were betrayed, outraged by the fact that they accepted this plea deal, and we did not know about it until we heard, just like everybody else.
Yeah. And so, first off, Judge, thank you as always for having me on. You always say yes to the judge. Okay. So, this whole situation is incredibly tragic for a number of reasons. So, I have a bit of a slightly different insight because, yeah, that's probably a whole other show, but I was in Idaho at the time that all of this was happening.
Oh, I
Yes,
did not know this.
Black woman in Idaho, that's a whole separate show. But anywho,
Right? True.
but be that as it may, I just remember how the entire community was just on edge, right? And it was sort of that manhunt in real time where, like, that's all that dominated the airwaves. And even at the coffee shops, at the diners, that's what folks were talking about. They were like, is this a serial killer? What's going on? So it's really something that captivated that whole Pacific Northwest area, but more importantly, the Washington state area, especially near the Idaho border. I mean, again, that's where he was, the defendant was rumored to have fled and all of that. So, it's kind of interesting to watch it unfold real time and see the impact it had on the community at that time. So then kind of flowing into where we are now, it completely startles me and horrifies me as a former prosecutor and as someone who was present, during that time, that the prosecution would not have sat down with the family. Because first of all, I mean, Judge, you remember this, like back in the day when we were handling cases, before you pled any case out, that was the one thing that would get you fired.
Yes.
Pleading out a case without the victim or next of kin's approval. So
And you had those victim advocates. DA's offices have the victim advocates specifically to work with the victims so there are no surprises, so they can be prepared, so they can understand the system. That's exactly why they have them. I'm floored that they didn't. And I'm a little bit glad to have a prosecution expert like yourself to say, yeah, it shouldn't have happened. Keep going.
No, 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 absolutely. And again, because the first thing you do when you meet with a next of kin and when you're handling homicide cases is to lay out the trajectory of the case. Listen, we may go to trial, but there may be a plea where it's too soon to talk about it now. But if that happens, I'm going to sit down with you. But, and in future meetings, you're like, all right, we're not at that juncture of a plea yet, but what would be your feelings? What is your sentiment? Is it nothing would be acceptable and you want to go to trial? Do you want to spare elderly family members, the horror having to sit through the case, all of those things you discuss and kind of flesh out before you get to that point of, hey, defense, what plea do you have in mind? So, and again, it's not to say that they were wrong to accept the plea. They weren't. What was wrong was to not talk to the family. And seeing that this is a small community, they're going to run into them at the grocery store. They're going to, and when I say they, the prosecution is going to run into family members at the grocery, at the diner. This is not like you're prosecuting where I was in Miami or in New York, where you're likely not going to run into the folks again. This is small town USA. And so it's even worse to think that you're going to now have to deal with the repercussions of not having that conversation, which would have been simple to do.
Simple to do. Simple to do. And it's only fair because the victims are not only the 4 students who are killed, it's everybody in those students' lives, their families, their friends. And I have to say this. So, Madison Mogan's father did express a sense of relief at the plea and said they hope to finally move forward. It's Kaylee Consalvas who voiced outrage, her family, calling the deal a betrayal and a deal with the devil. And here's why. They had hoped for a full confession, including details about the murder weapon's location and confirmation that he acted alone. Now, we know when the judge asked if he was admitting guilt because he was guilty of these crimes, all he said was yes. He didn't give any of that information. So, my first question for you is you made the comment it wasn't wrong to take the plea. Number one, why do you not think it was a bad thing to take the plea in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table? And number two, you don't have to make a full confession when you plead to guilty.
Correct, correct. So, first off, I mean, I'm still at point A on this entire thing,
I
but
know.
I don't think it was wrong to take the plea in light of the fact you now have 4 families who've lost loved ones in the most horrific way possible. Young people, which adds another layer of just pain to it. But then the amount of attention, media attention that this case garnered, it was going to turn into a circus, which meant there was going to be media left, right, and center. The families were going to have to be escorted in and out with cameras like stuck in their faces. How do you feel about the testimony today? How did you feel about seeing those graphic pictures? All of that. So folks don't often realize when you're in the middle of one of these high profile cases, your privacy is shot. Your privacy is
You're right.
gone. And that ability to be able to watch and see these horrible things that you learn in the courtroom and then be able to process it and decompress, you don't get that grace to be able to do that. So it's a trial is extremely stressful on a family in the best of circumstances, and this is not the best of circumstances. So there's that. And then separately, again, another thing people don't think about the death penalty, just because, let's say we did go to trial and he was found guilty and the death penalty was imposed. It's not like he's going to be executed next week. There's going to be appeal after appeal after appeal. More likely than not, he will die from natural old age or other natural causes or other causes versus an actual execution, right? That's
Agree.
just the reality. If you look at anyone, go to any of these prisons and just kind of Google, hey, who's on death row in my state, and look at the year that the homicide occurred, and then your present day, you'll realize folks will stay on death row for 10, 15, 20 years. And all of those appeals processes. And every single time there's an appeal, there's a notice that goes to the family, reminding them again that another appeal has been filed. So they don't really get closure for decades.
Ever. Ever. I
Ever.
agree with you. And in fact, you're right. Many people on death row are not technically put to death. They die from other means, or there's an appeal process for a reason. And so death penalty cases can be overturned. Governors, politicians can step in and overturn a death penalty case. So you are right. There's no certainty if a death penalty is imposed. And in fact, there is a certainty it will tie it up in our criminal justice system for even longer. I mean, you make an excellent point, too, just about, the stress on victims going through a case like this. And I will tell you, I have said from the bench and in my career as a litigator, listen, I can never tell you what a court's going to do, just like attorneys could not predict what I was going to do. You don't know what a jury's going to do. There is no way to guarantee a result with a jury. Yes, I think based on the evidence, he would be found guilty of all 4 murders. I really don't see it otherwise. But do you agree that that's always a risk? You just don't know for sure where a jury's going to land.
You really don't. I mean, we've seen it with the Diddy case where there was all this debate as to was it sex trafficking, was it RICO racketeering, transportation for purposes of prostitution, all of that. And then everybody was like, oh my gosh, the jury only came back with the transportation charge, but it was for sure sex trafficking with Cassie, or for sure it was racketeering. The prosecution proved it 10 different ways from Sunrise, right? Like all of those debates, that's probably an easier, more recent case to kind of think of. But you
Yes.
really, I mean, we all had opinions as seasoned litigators, as former prosecutors, public defenders, whatever. And all of us were like, yeah, okay, I was wrong on that. Or, and again, we're immersed in the system and we still don't always, guess right as to what a jury's going to do. So for a family going into this process already in pain, already fractured, and then to have the gamble of, well, I don't know what the jury's going to do. I think we have a strong case, but and it's a hard discussion to have with family and tell them, like, listen, I can't guarantee you an outcome. I'm going to fight like hell for you, but I can't guarantee what these 12 people are going to do. And so understand if he's found not guilty, he will walk out the door behind you. Like, make no mistake about it. You will see him within the next 24 hours. Again,
And this
small.
man would kill again. If he ever got out, I have no doubt he would kill again.
He
I
was
have
just
no
warming up.
doubt in my mind he would kill again. That's this person. And I think too, the reality is, does it really bring closure to go through a public trial like this and then get a conviction and getting the death penalty or not? And here's why I say that, because everybody wants to know, why did Bryan Kohberger do this? He
Yeah.
entered a plea. He didn't say why he did this. The prosecutors have stated they have no evidence that he knew the victims personally, and there's no criminal history. He had a criminology background in what he studied. No criminal history. And so the prosecutors have said, we don't have a reason that we can articulate for why he did this. When he entered his plea, he did not say why he did this. And the issue I have is, I think people have to realize, even after going through a trial, a very public trial, even if there's a conviction, even if the death penalty is imposed, that does not mean that anyone is going to learn anything else about why he did it, Melba. There's no way to force any convicted felon of sharing or saying why they've committed a crime.
And that's also sometimes an uphill battle for the prosecution, because if you can't explain why something happened, you have a harder road with the jury. Now, granted, in this particular instance, the evidence is all there, right? You got the
Right.
DNA on the sheath of the knife, and you have it tracked back to him purchasing it, and all of these different things. So you have the evidence, but people just essentially want to know why something happened, want to know why you woke up that day and decide to go into a house and kill 4 people. And I think it's not only just from why did this happen, but to kind of understand the psyche of killers so that we can maybe prevent this from happening again, so that we can pick up on the signs earlier with somebody's, acting strangely, or saying certain word tracks, or exhibiting certain signs. Could we prevent this from happening again? So I think there's a few different layers as to why we want to know why. But the reality is, if the jury can't get their mind around why something happened, you have more of an uphill battle of
Mm.
getting them to convict.
And I think anybody understandably wants to know, why my family? Why my child? Why would you pick my child to kill? And I think that's the answer some of these family members want. And the one thing I'm going to say about our justice system is, regrettably, there's no way to force that answer. It is not necessarily, regardless of the justice of a conviction, it's not necessarily going to be answered for a family. And that's what I hate for this family. And I think the clear communication up front that you mentioned earlier, not only about these are the things that can happen, this is what a trial would look like, and now we're considering a plea, and this is what it means for you. Also, a clear communication about this is what we can learn from a trial. The outcome is a guilty, a not guilty, or a hung jury. Those are the outcomes. The specifics about why he did it, whether or not anyone else was involved, if you don't have evidence of that, those things aren't going to be answered. And what I don't know, and Melba, I feel for all of these families, I don't know as any family of a victim how you ever reconcile that, how you can go to sleep at night knowing you're really never going to know why.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And that's what I always encouraged my next of kin, my survivors, when and even now when I do victims' rights work, I say,
Right.
listen, you got to find your own closure. The system can only give you so much. It will say, this person is responsible for the death of your loved one. Okay, fine. We know that. Now, the why, is there anything I could have done differently? Could I have prevented this? All of that is still going to go through your head. And that's something you have to work on with the help of a therapist, with the help of a spiritual counselor, whatever it may be. But you find help to be able to address those questions, because that will eat you up alive. And sadly, we have seen so many instances where, I think about the Jean Benet Ramsey's family, right? And how, the mother basically passed away from cancer, not knowing whatever happened to her daughter. Like, she literally went home to the Lord, not understanding, or not knowing who did it and why. So that's the kind of thing where, sadly, you see next of kin who may not have the full life that they should have had because of the pain and agony and the stress of all of this. And then sadly, they don't get the closure, and it results in a short lifespan. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration as you make strategy decisions in moving a case forward. And again, utilizing your victim advocates to make sure that, hey, checking in with the survivor or the next of kin. Do you
Mhm.
need anything? Can I connect you with services? So-and-so has a great counseling program, or maybe you should talk to so-and-so, whatever. Or a circle of mothers who lost children, so at least you're in a support group. Those type of things. That's why that's so critical. And again, this was such a missed opportunity to help bring just a little bit more healing to these families by having that open and honest discussion. Like, listen, we got to take this, and this is why. I'm going to explain it to you. They may not agree. That doesn't mean that just because they said no, you're not going to go take the plea. No, but you at least give them the courtesy of that discussion up front.
The
And then at least
communication.
when they come out, it's a unified force. Listen, they talked to us, we didn't agree, but we understand why they did it. And that's a much better optic and more trust in the criminal justice system versus, oh, well, we just went ahead and did whatever we wanted to do because we have the power.
Yeah, even if you just say they talked to us and we don't agree with what they did, fine. They talked to us is the important piece. Well, I want to tell you what I think the motive is in this case, and it's greed. Because to me, this man, Bryan Kohberger, was greedy for a certain experience or sensation. I think that he had this desire to commit this perfect crime and get away with it and brutally torture. And the premeditation, what he was wearing, dressed in all black with the mask, having the knife, accidentally leaving the sheath. I have every belief in my mind that he accidentally left that at the crime scene. He was trying to commit the perfect crime. I think he wanted to test his knowledge of his criminology and outsmart law enforcement and everyone else. And so for me, I think it's almost an intellectual greed of look what I can do. I'm smarter than everyone. And I think he would do it again if he were out.
I agree. I also, though, think about ego,
Mm,
because that again, his actions were being driven by ego and this superiority complex where he thinks he's smarter and better than everyone else. So I look at that, and I also look at lust, because why did you pick young women? Your initial targets were two young women. Not, and the other two happened to be because you ran into them in the house. And I think, again, in that whole, quest for the perfect crime, time after time, defendants never realize what happens once you commit the crime. You can plan everything up until that moment, but you're not ready for the rush of adrenaline, the fear, the stuff you didn't plan on, as in the two people that you ended up having to confront. You didn't plan for them. And that's why the sheath got lost, because, again, the perfect plan is going to go off the rails because you're dealing with real life. And so, seeing all of that again, I still am point A of just the horror of this, but I still think the fact that it was two very attractive young women, to me, it spoke to either some sort of toxic masculinity, some sort of like red pill foolishness that we're seeing now, where, incels and all of these dudes who, like, because they can't get a date, they feel they got to kill women or something. Like, he kind of smacks me of that ilk. So, but, yeah, the greed, I think, ties a lot of that together, but I see ego and lust also kind of weaving its ugly head through this whole scenario.
Fair, absolutely, and I also think that he was creeper. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but when you start talk about the women and what he did to him, and kind of a creeper, but also it's like he had this craving for this psychological thrill, right? To have ultimate control over these individuals' lives and really release his dark impulses, this almost a psychological greed for wanting to do all this. And to your point, maybe it was just about the women, and then he did run into these other people and he killed them too. But I just feel like these dark impulses and his inability to say no to it, and the ego that you mentioned, and I'm smarter than everybody, I can commit this perfect crime. What if he hadn't left that sheath? Melba, would we know who the suspect was? Would we really have him in custody? I mean, there is other evidence in the car, but that sheath started it all. So I just wonder if potentially he could have gotten away with these crimes.
Oh, he absolutely could have gotten away with it. And
Oh, I'm going to throw up.
I know, sorry, but it's just, again, because there's humans on both sides, right? So law enforcement can only do what they can with the evidence they have. If there's no evidence that's been recovered, I mean, that's why we have all these unsolved murders and disappearances, because evidence was just not left at the scene. And there was no, and that was the hardest part about all this, there was no known connection between Kohberger and anyone in that house. And, when they did the searches on social media and everything else, they couldn't even find a party that they may have crossed paths with. Nothing. Nothing on socials. No manifesto. Nothing. So if it hadn't been for the sheath, I think the sheath is what made this a slam dunk. Without the sheath, there would have been other evidence, whatever, but it would have been much weaker, and more likely that there would have been a not guilty, or even a likelihood that he wouldn't have been charged altogether, because they're like, we think it's him, but we need more.
I agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think it was vital evidence as well. Now, tell me about the sentencing. It's scheduled currently for July 23rd, and there's sealed court documents. There's an ongoing gag order, and some of that stuff may come out at sentencing or not. What do you think? We're going to have victim impact statements, certainly. And he has the opportunity to speak. I don't think he's going to say a word, but we'll have to wait and see what he does. But what about some of that other stuff that's been sealed, gag orders? Can any of that come out at sentencing potentially?
Some of it may. It all depends on what the prosecution's argument is going to be at sentencing. Obviously, life is clearly, that's going to be a plea, kind of end of. But I think the prosecution is going to want to lay that public record of, correcting the misinformation that might be floating out there. Laying out, here's all the evidence we had, and here's how we think we would have gotten a guilty verdict. And then, of course, the defense may argue some mitigating factors, or, whatever the case may be. But it's not even true argument, because, again, the deal is already done. They already know, what they're going to get. But, if there's any indications of remorse or something, that would be the narrow opportunity for that to be revealed. I do not think Bryan Kohberger is going to say anything. If
I don't either.
anything, if we're lucky, like lotto lucky, he might say, turn and be like, I'm sorry, I don't know why I did this. That would be best case scenario. That
And I
would
don't
be,
think he is sorry. I don't. I
That's what
don't.
I'm
I don't
saying.
think he's sorry, but we'll see. He could. You're right. He might do that, and he could do that. And we've seen
Yeah.
convicted felons do that, where they are sobbing and they're upset and they're so remorseful and they have lots to say to the family. I don't know that that's Bryan Kohberger, but he'll have that opportunity.
Yeah, he will. But again, I don't think he's going to say much. And I can anticipate that the victim impact statements are going to be just gut wrenching. Gut
Gut
wrenching.
wrenching.
I mean, security is going to have to be very tight in that courtroom because, I mean, we've seen it before where, family members get upset and want to put hands on the defendant, and you understand it, you get it, but we can't permit it. So, I think it's going to be incredibly emotional. I hope that the prosecution and their victim advocate is working with the family in terms of helping them craft their victim impact statements. Certainly, you don't tell them what to say, but you
Right.
kind of give them, guidelines and just like, this is kind of how long it should be. And, these are the types of things you should highlight, things like that. So again, they're not feeling alone in this process. That could be a way to kind of give I'm so sorry we didn't really talk about this in advance. That could be another way to kind of
Yeah.
smooth
Good
the
point.
waters, but we'll see. But it's going to be July 23rd is going to be a very, very painful day. Period.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, when you give a victim impact statement, you're not supposed to direct it at the defendant. It's not something you get to lecture or talk to the defendant. But I will tell you, Melba, recently I covered a trial, and in fact, the judge allowed them to address it to the defendant, and nobody ever objected, which shocked me. The defense attorney didn't. So I don't know. Potentially, this judge might allow them to direct it to Bryan Kohberger, but I doubt it. That's not how it's supposed to work. So I do not suspect that'll happen. The other thing is, theoretically, a judge doesn't have to accept a plea deal. So the judge could say, theoretically, I'm not going to accept this plea deal. But when he has pled guilty to 4 murders and getting life without parole, I don't have any doubt the judge is going to accept it, right? I think the judge is absolutely going to accept this plea deal. I want to end in memory of the 4 students, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Consalvis, Zaina Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin and their family. Any final thoughts, Melba?
I mean, they should be here with us today. There's no reason for them not to be with us. I will say this, especially directed towards young folks starting their journey in life, going to college and all of that. If something doesn't feel right, don't don't sit on it, right? I mean, my heart breaks for the young woman that was in the house and was texting her friends and, it was like, I heard a thump in the middle of the night, and I still have questions as to why she didn't immediately call the police. Like, a dude you don't know in a baklava walked past you in your house. Like, that is the time. I don't care how drunk you are. I don't care if you've got a kilo of cocaine in your closet. You call the police because the police don't care about that. They want to know, are you safe? The rest of the stuff you can deal with. But if there was a way to be able to get law enforcement in there, maybe somebody's life could have been spared. Maybe they could have gotten assistance and somebody could have had medical intervention to survive. We don't know. But just remember, if something doesn't feel right, it's better to be safe than to be sorry. And if the cops come and you're like, hee, nothing doing, fine. But don't wait, because imagine if he had come back and killed her. Like, I just want kids to just be vigilant.
And I'm sure that's what they were terrified of. Like, uh-oh, we hear something, and you can be frozen and think, oh my God, what's going on? And you're scared to death and you can't think about calling the police. But your advice is so well given that as hard as it is, you have to act immediately. And the other piece of that is trust your gut. I tell my kids all the time, trust your gut. If you have any kind of feeling about it, don't question it. Don't be embarrassed if you make a false call. If you believe something's going on, let the police decide that. You just have to trust your gut. Melba Pearson, you're amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your expertise as we await the sentencing of Bryan Kohberger, knowing the death penalty is off the table. Let us know, viewers, listeners, what do you think about that? How do you feel for the victims and the victim's family, knowing he will not face the death penalty, but he has simply said, yes, I admit my guilt to murdering these 4 innocent students?